I found a tube of personal lubricant in my husband's car glove box. No words, just a quiet thought, and then a slow, deliberate swap. Industrial superglue in its place. I left town for work. 2 hours later, the fire department was at our doorstep, and my husband's betrayal was exposed in the most humiliating way possible. If you're listening right now, sit tight. I'm going to tell you everything, from the first small crack in our marriage to the little white lie I told that set everything in motion. From the long, quiet planning that felt like a cold, steady heartbeat under my ribs, to the moment the door came down and the whole neighborhood saw what I had been carrying alone for years. I'll tell you why I did it. I won't pretend it was noble. I'll tell you how it felt, what I learned, and how it changed me. You should know something about me before I begin. I built a bakery from nothing. I started with a folding table and a single oven in a tiny rented kitchen, and I spent 30 years turning it into a small empire people in our town bragged about. I woke up before dawn for decades, kneaded dough until my hands were raw, learned how to make a croissant that would make a grown man cry, and decorated wedding cakes that people still talk about. The business has my fingerprints, my sweat, my voice in the way we wrap pastries. I taught my son everything I knew. I handed down recipes, handwritten notes stained with butter and coffee. I thought family and work were the same thing for us. I thought my life's work was safe because it was our life. Marcus was my husband. He was handsome when we were young, good at talking to customers, and steady enough to balance the ledgers when I didn't have time. We raised our son, Ethan, together. We argued, we made up, we survived. For years, he was the man I'd promised forever to. Sometimes he was lazy. Sometimes he took credit for our late-night work. I grumbled. I forgave. I told myself that love covers unevenness, that running a business takes 2 people by necessity and 3 if your pride wants in. I didn't want to be the woman who made everything about herself. I wanted to be practical. I wanted to be the kind of woman who held the family together. Then came Chloe. At first, she was lovely. She was polished, quick with compliments, the kind of person who makes your sun shine. Ethan was young when he met her, sweeter, softer, and he smiled more than he had in years. Everyone likes new love in the family. I did too. I baked cookies for their engagement party. I ironed a dress I hadn't worn in a decade. She was polite at first, then warm, and her laugh fit like a new curtain in our house. If I had to be honest, I might have said she was a bit too smooth, too practiced, but people are all a little practiced. I made excuses. We all do. Small things happened that made me uneasy. Marcus started working late more often. He'd say it was the books, the vendors, some late order, and I believed him because who wants to suspect the man who pours his coffee and kisses your forehead? Chloe started appearing when she wasn't supposed to be home, at the bakery on slow Tuesdays, popping in with cookies her mother had sent. She lingered near the register when Marcus helped customers, and her eyes would find him like a moth drawn to light. Little jokes became private looks. Little looks became private lunches. I filed the days away in my head like a woman saving receipts, each one a tiny alarming proof. I'd like to tell you I confronted him gently, that we sat down and talked like adults. The truth is, my first confrontation was to myself. For a week, I watched. I listened for the whisper underneath ordinary sentences. And when I finally found the tube of lube in my husband's glove box, everything that had been a whisper turned into a radio blasting through my skull. I remember the way the glove compartment felt. Cool plastic, a smell of old receipts and dryer sheets. I'd been looking for a parking slip, something small. Instead, I saw a tube I knew belonged in backgrounds of movies, not in my husband's life. For a moment, the world narrowed. I felt a sort of shock that was quieter than I expected. Not sobbing, not raging, but a steady, cold something that settled into my bones. I thought of Ethan. I thought of the bakery. I thought of all the mornings I was up before dawn and all the nights I went to sleep with flour on my hands. I thought of the times Marcus had told me to rest while he handled things at home. That stupid little tube was the last straw. It made sense of so many puzzles. It lit all the small, suspicious things like a match. I did not yell then. I did not accuse. I put the tube back, closed the glove compartment, and walked out. I went home and made a list. Not a list to expose him, not yet, but a list of what I had, what mattered, where I would be weak, and where I would need to be sharp. If you've ever had your life unspool in a single moment, you know that arithmetic starts to feel like a kind of salvation. You count what you have left. You know what you will not lose to a lie. That night, I watched him. I watched his easy receding of responsibility. I watched Chloe grace our door like she owned its hinges. I watched the way Marcus looked at her when he thought I wasn't watching. The look itself, hungry, admiring, hurt in a way that was almost practical. It wasn't about sex, not really. It was about betrayal, sure. But more than that, it was about being seen as smaller than I am. After 40 years of giving my life to the business, to our home, being reduced by a look felt like theft. Week passed. I could have gone to Ethan then. I could have torn open the house and called the nearest friend and let the city know. Instead, I did something quieter. I drove to the hardware store at dawn, like a woman buying a broom, and I bought industrial-strength Superglue. I came home, and under the hum of the kitchen light, I swapped the tube. I did it with the most ordinary gestures possible, like someone replacing a light bulb or wiping a counter. I cleaned the surface of the lube tube, removed it gently, inserted the new tube, and closed the glove compartment. I left no fingerprints. I left no evidence that I had ever been in the car. It felt like a theft of my own, retrieving the things that had been stolen from me by stealth. I want to pause here and tell you that it wasn't just about the act itself. It was about what that act allowed me to do afterward. I could pretend, I could smile, I could carry on. That gave me time. Time is a weapon in itself. Being inconspicuous is a skill. I learned to be ordinary again, to make the bed, to call suppliers, to answer the phone with the same level voice I've always had. I wore my ordinary like armor. Because the truth is, nerves snapped worse when you know someone's hurt you, but have no proof. I was careful. I saved receipts. I copied files. I read messages. I watched. The more I watched, the worse it got. You'd think an affair, disgusting and personal as it is, would be enough, but their plan was not just infidelity. It was greed wrapped around infidelity. They thought they could take everything beyond morning sheets and pillowcases. They had begun to talk about the bakery not as a place that fed the town, but as an asset to be hollowed out. They had texts, little messages like, "Once she's out of the picture, we can move fast," and "I'll get the transfer done. Don't worry about the bank." There were spreadsheets Marcus thought hidden from me. He'd created a shadow ledger with numbers shifted to make his ownership look larger. Chloe had smoothed her voice into quiet plans about investors and how to modernize the bakery into something that would allow them to cut staff and reroute profits. They believed, arrogantly, that a woman who had kneaded dough for 40 years wouldn't understand the language of corporate maneuvering. That was the dagger. Cheating was one thing. Plotting to steal the last 40 years of my work felt like a categorical erasure. I had been invisible to their greed. They had been counting on me to be too tired to fight. They had no notion that I would stand up and count to the finish. So I planned. Planning is, for me, the truest kind of revenge. It was not dramatic at the start. It was small, almost boring. A ledger here, a photo of a message there, a copy of an email tucked into a folder labeled bakery papers. I started cataloging everything I had ever done for that bakery. Supplier contracts, recipes, signed memos, payroll records. I ordered hard copies of digital transfers. I sat with my legal advisor, a woman named Marta, who had a voice like a bell and a no-nonsense way of cutting someone's ego down to size. Marta listened to the story, nodded, and said, We will make sure your name is the one on the deed. That felt like the first honest comfort I had in months. But comfort alone doesn't make a show-stopping moment. Comfort doesn't make jaws drop or doors break down. For that, you need two things: timing and spectacle. I had built the ledger, I had the legal theory, but I wanted the humiliation to be undeniable. If you're going to burn the bridge, burn a memory that will make them think twice in the rest of their days. I wanted the town to see what he had become. I wanted Ethan to see with his own eyes. I wanted Chloe's mask to fall off in front of the people who had once smiled at her at holiday tables. The idea of using the glove compartment tube as a key part of the plan started as a private joke in my head and grew into a precise plan. The glue would not physically harm them if used as I planned. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Marcus babbled apologetic things. Chloe tried to cry and point fingers and speak of mistakes. The firefighters administered first response to make sure there were no burns from the glue application, and then, with the tact of professionals who have to handle human messes, escorted them apart with help from paramedics and an approved solvent. Medical people helped alleviate the physical danger. There was cursing, there was pleading, there were the kinds of sentences people say when a private life unravels in public. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it, you don't understand, and worst of all, I never wanted it to be like this. None of it changed the simple image that had burned into the neighborhood's memory. Ethan stood off to the side for a long time, hands on his hips, breathing like a man trying to hold himself together. He wouldn't speak to his father. He wouldn't speak to Chloe. He left the house with the rest of the crew, chest tight, jaw clenched. He called me later that night, not to ask me if I had been the one to orchestrate anything, but simply to say he was gone and that he had started divorce papers. He wanted the bakery taken out of any shared ownership of his father. He wanted legal separation. There was a flame in his voice that scared me and made me cry in the hotel bathroom. I had wanted him to see, but the sight of his heartbreak was heavier than I imagined. I knew then that revenge is not a neat instrument. It cuts things in unpredictable ways. When word spread, the town reacted like a body that had been poked. People who had once clapped Marcus on the back at weekend markets now avoided his gaze. Customers who had once complimented Chloe's helpful touch started whispering about impropriety. The bakery that very next morning felt different. The regulars were quieter, probing, like people trying to understand whether their bread would taste the same in a place marred by scandal. The lenders we'd dealt with picked up on the hush. Someone suggested temporarily taking the bakery offline until the dust settled. Lawyers called, gossip called. The court of public opinion weighed heavier than any personal confession. I pressed forward with the ledger I'd been compiling. I presented the documents to my lawyer. I made sure our files were in order, that the bakery's trademarks and deeds had my name in, clearly. I had arranged for a review of the business records and had lawyers ready. When the time came, I showed the signed contracts that proved decades of my ownership and labor. Marcus's shadow ledger came into the light like a cheap curtain. He had forged entries and moved funds around. He had assumed our trust was as pliable as dough, but he had not accounted for a woman who keeps records in her head and on paper. The court case was one thing emotionally and another thing practically. Legally, I had an advantage because I was the one to build the business from the ground up. Customers testified. Staff testified. Photographs of old menus and receipts showed the evolution was mine. It isn't that I was cruel, it's that I was thorough. The judge had to look at more than the spectacle. He had to look at years of work and the obligations written into business law. When the dust settled, the bakery was legally mine, and Marcus was removed from any official capacity. He had to sell his shares, and the values were set in a way that protected the business from being gutted. That day in court was oddly anticlimactic. The public had already judged him. The headline stories, the way neighbors avoided the shop, the way Ethan refused to speak to his father, all of that had already delivered a punishment that no judge could enhance. Still, the legal victory mattered for the future. It meant my livelihood was secure. It meant that the legacy of my life work would not be sold and carved into something unrecognizable by two people who had treated it as an asset. It meant that, in practical terms, their plan to reduce me to tired irrelevance had failed. People asked me if I regretted it. I always pause at that question because regret is not a single word. I regret the pain it caused my son more than anything. I regret the way his trust was shattered and the way his family unit was burned down in front of him. But the deeper places of me, the places that had been constantly minimized and whispered over for decades, felt lighter. I did not feel triumphant in a vulgar way. I felt a quieter, steely contentment. I had reclaimed dignity that had been stolen in increments. To use a petty phrase, I had gotten my pastry back. There were consequences I hadn't foreseen. People came to me with offers of help and with judgments. Some loved me for the way I handled it. Some despised me for playing with humiliation as a tool. I heard sermons at church that, between the lines, admonished me for the cruelty. I had friends who said I should have taken the high road. They meant well, and the high road is a romantic idea. But the truth is, a lifelong labor deserves defense. You do not have to be saintly to protect what you built. You just have to be willing to be strategic. Ethan's divorce was brutal in its own way. He wanted no part of Chloe, and he wanted to make sure no one else would be exploited by his father's greed. He took some time away from the bakery for his own healing. We had long conversations, at first terse, then increasingly honest. He told me about the small cracks in his marriage he had noticed and how ashamed he felt for not seeing the larger picture. He also told me, later, that he felt proud of how I protected what was ours. That pride was balm. It would not erase the hurt, but it made the future feel collaborative again. Chloe moved away. She tried to find work, but the town is small and memories are long. People were unkind. That too was a consequence. We are in a culture that likes to make stories into public property. She had made her choices. She had also been a woman, a young woman, seduced by the wrong sort of power. I am not indifferent to the complexity of her motives. I recognize the layers of cruelty and seduction in human behavior. But the arithmetic of betrayal made her actions unforgivable in my household. Marcus, he retreated. He apologized publicly and privately, but apologies without restoration are often empty. He had to find work where no one knew him, somewhere his past wouldn't hover over the glass of a pie. He hired an accountant and sold off assets to pay settlements. In time, the town stopped whispering, but the look on the faces of people who had once admired him never returned to warmth. People are slow to return to someone who has broken their trust in the most intimate ways. As for me, I kept waking up early. I still kneaded dough with the same hands, but there was a difference. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the shop is tired and the display cases are beginning their slow bloom of pastries, I feel lighter. There is a freedom in knowing that I do not have to share the burden of decision with someone who would sell our life for a profit. There is a difficult joy in being the one who carries the torch. I will tell you plainly, revenge is messy. It is not a tidy narrative where you walk away with a grin and life is suddenly sunny. People were hurt. Relationships were severed. I sleep with the knowledge that my actions resonated farther than I intended. But I also sleep with the knowledge that those who had been greedy were exposed for what they were. And when I step into the bakery every morning and see the line of people who come for bread and for the sense of normalcy that a small shop can offer, I know I did something that protected not just a building or a brand, but a history stitched into recipes and the memories of brides and families. If you are listening and thinking about what you would do in my place, I want to ask you something. Would you have waited? Would you have let pride take a smaller hit than your dignity? Would you have fought in silence until you were ready? These are hard choices. We all have a breaking point. Mine was a tube of lube in a glove box, but it could have been any small thing that reveals a large pattern. My story isn't a map for everyone. It is a confession and a warning. Keep receipts. Keep legal proof. Know what you will tolerate and what you won't. And if you decide to fight, know that patience and precision are tools as powerful as anger. When people ask for a moral, I give them this. Justice and revenge are not the same. Justice is a process. Revenge is an act. I had both in different ways. The court gave me formal justice. My plan gave me a revenge that achieved a public reckoning. Whether that makes me noble is not for me to decide. I only know I protected what I had built with blood and butter. The fire department that stood on our lawn did their jobs with a dryness of professionalism I respected. They did not laugh, and they did not gloat. They treated my son as they would any man in pain, and my husband as a human being who had made a terrible choice. Their presence turned a private disaster into a public intervention. That publicness is something I used because I believed it would be fairer than a private collapse. In the end, doubt and secrecy protect cheaters. Light exposes them. People sometimes say,